EU negotiator Michel Barnier has travelled to London for a final attempt to conclude a trade deal with the UK shortly before the deadline. The prospects are bad, however. This week, French customs officials gave a foretaste of what it could look like at Dover ferry port from January 1st. They simulated the truck controls after the end of the transition period. Then all exports from Great Britain have to come up with detailed customs and content declarations at the border. Currently, 3.5 million trucks a year use the Dover-Calais crossing. British authorities estimate that 270 million new customs declarations will be required. The small test run by the French immediately produced long queues on the M20 motorway from London. Meanwhile, the residents of the neighbouring Kent region are complaining about the construction of a gigantic truck parking lot at junction 10 of the motorway and fear for their peaceful life due to future traffic jams. Maximum control? Can you have it? The mood of the team led by EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier on the way to London seemed clouded. But that can also be diplomacy according to the motto, the glass is half full at best. The conversations were interrupted because of a corona infection of an employee. Now they continue in the British capital. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned the European Parliament on Wednesday that the deal was still unsafe. There has been real progress in matters of cooperation with the police and the judiciary. The outline of a contract text for goods, services and transport is also on the table. However, 3 areas are still unresolved, as has been the case for months: fair competition, supervision of the agreement and fishing. Von der Leyen emphasized that robust mechanisms were needed to implement an agreement. After the announced breach of contract in London that the agreement for the Northern Irish border would be overturned with the new Single Market Act, the EU position has hardened here. In the absence of trust, it is now about maximum control. The next few days will be decisive, added the Commission boss. The European Parliament has already agreed to hold a special session on December 28th to ratify an agreement. The time until then is needed for the translation and review of 600 pages of legal text. Just a small comment on the fact that some say that they completely collapsed and buckled and blah 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 because they set this date. What still stands is that the European Parliament will not ratify any deal if the single market is unchanged until then, the Single Market Act. If it still includes the breaches of international law, they will not ratify this deal. Setting this date doesn't change that. But let's continue. On one last try is possible, but it's getting harder. The coming week is therefore generally seen as the last date for an agreement. The talks were held earlier at this last exit sign, but now the negotiators are objectively running out of time. The final deadline is the 1st of January. The transition period will inevitably end on December 31st. On the subject of fair competition, an agreement would be possible if the partners accept a range within which the production standards move. In other words, the EU could be satisfied if Great Britain applied similar rules, for example, to environmental protection or occupational safety. The problem here, however, are clauses that are intended to ensure ongoing adaptation. For the British government, Brexit is an opportunity to deviate from EU standards. The EU, however, wants to guarantee its companies fair conditions of competition and ward off dumping production. EU Commission spokesman Daniel Ferry dampened expectations. There has been progress on important issues, but there are still 3 unresolved issues that determine the decision between deal and no deal, he tweeted. In the second conflict issue, the supervision and control of the agreement, for example, the EU wants to immediately impose punitive tariffs if the British side deviates from the agreement. London, on the other hand, refers to WTO rules in this case, which are so mild that they can hardly be a deterrent. The EU wants the toughest possible penal and control mechanisms because since the so-called Single Market Act, Brussels expects that London will not necessarily respect the agreement. Well, they still could go for Guy Verhofstadt's guillotine clauses then. The fisheries sector is of great political importance. The British government had promised its fishermen control over their own waters after leaving the EU. This means that EU fishermen are no longer allowed to work in the British 200-kilometer zone from January. Most recently, London wanted to offer the EU a 3-year transition period and/or annual negotiations on the fish quotas. Michel Barnier refuses and now went to London with an offer to return up to 18% of their catch to the British. Companies and affected citizens are currently being called upon by the government to prepare for Brexit through an information campaign. Not for every price. The problem is that many companies do not know what to expect. A hard Brexit with a lot of administrative work and controls, or an agreement with slightly less burdens? The latest remarks by Britain's Treasury Secretary Rishi Sunak do not point to an increased British willingness to compromise. He said he hoped there would be an agreement, but the government did not want it at any cost. Well, you heard the same from the EU, so that's just another ping-pong game there. That would be wrong because there are things in these negotiations that are important to us. The British Budgetary Control Authority warned of a no-deal scenario on Wednesday. As a result, economic output will immediately fall by up to 2% and hit areas of the export industry that had been spared from the corona pandemic. In the long term, the office had predicted a shrinking of the gross domestic product of up to 4% due to Brexit. Finance Minister Sunak disregarded these forecasts and pointed out that the consequences of the corona crisis would overshadow everything else. Well, the chairman of the Bank of England already contradicted him there. Brussels believes the draft Brexit treaty is as advanced as the negotiators' competence allows. In any case, the principle of the EU remains: no treaty can replace the advantages of membership. The decisive political compromises, namely how far London wants to meet the EU, are in the hands of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And so far, he has not given any sign of how the dice could fall. And if you now want to know more about Brexit, first of all, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Then YouTube has chosen another of my videos right here for you in the end screen. And if you also want to see European or global news and politics, those channels are up there. I'll see you in my next video. Click and enjoy. Viel Spaß!